Great to be with you, and welcome to Denver. I'm glad we're in Denver and not in the Pacific Northwest, the greater Northwest area. Bishop Sally Dick and I send each other funny little comments to each other, and the other day she sent me a comment saying, gee, Grant, ever since you've been in that area, because she's a Washington girl, you've had fires, floods, and mudslides. I don't know if they're going to survive your leadership, she said. And I wrote back to her and I said, yeah, I agree, Sally. If I'm here any longer, we're going to probably fall into the ocean. It worries me, though, because General Conference in 2016 is in Portland. So all of you who are elected, beware. A couple of thank yous. One is to our GBHM staff who have really put on an excellent program and this venue. I've been around GBHM for about 25 years, maybe 30 years, and off and on in their board. And I can honestly say that this is the finest staff that I've ever experienced on higher ed staff. So we thank them for all of what they do. I also want to thank Neil Alexander, president of the Publishing House, for providing copies of Spiritual Kaizen for you board chairs, and I hope it's helpful. Just as a roadmap, we are going to stay this morning. We thought instead of having a huge presentation all at once, to break it up into 3 segments. And after each segment, we'd like you to have a concentrated discussion with your Board of Ordained Ministry cabinet. So some of you are going to have to be creative because one of our Texas boards and cabinets brought everybody. So they have like 27 people. And where are you? Over there? Okay. You might have to put a couple tables together, and feel free to do that. Now, we do have some independents here, folks that have just come solo, so to speak. Some presidents. I know Laleen Rector from Garrett is here. If they can join with another group and integrate them and give them that hospitality, that'd be great, okay? But we will give you plenty of time, and we'll take a break midterm so that you all have a chance to refresh yourselves. Let me start with this particular, if we could put the PowerPoint up, this particular diagram. This is how dinosaurs became extinct. Yeah, I love this because I love dinosaurs. And the metaphor is missing the boat. And the culture has changed so much around us that I don't want us to miss the boat, so to speak. And so this opening is going to talk a little bit about the changing context that we're all faced with. So I'm going to begin with a Jim Collins adage, and that is the Stockdale principle, which is to confront the brutal facts but never lose hope. It's something that all of you know, this particular adage. It came from Admiral Stockdale, of course, whom was interned into a Vietnamese prison camp during the Vietnam War. And he noticed those that survived had this particular ethos. He said the ones that didn't make it were the naive optimists, because they said to themselves and to others that we'll be out of here by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go, and they were still there. And then they'd say, well, we'll be out of here by the summer. And the summer would come and the summer would go, and they weren't out of there. And he said they really died of a false hope. And those that survived were able to confront the brutal facts of their situation, but never to lose hope. And I think that's what Nanette was trying to tell us today in her sermonette, to provide that sense of hope for us for the future. Now, I'd like to center us around this particular principle and confront the brutal facts in 3 ways. One is the world around us has changed dramatically, and we all know this. And in this sense, we're talking about a U.S. context, not a world context. And so we are confining ourselves to the U.S. and Europe at this point. But the Pew Research keeps getting worse when it comes to organized religion. We are now living in a post-religious institutional culture, and we can't escape that fact. The current Pew Research shows that 1 in 5 Americans has absolutely no religious preference whatsoever. They belong to nothing. Does not mean they're not spiritual or have deep longings, but they have no religious affiliation. That's 46 million Americans. And when you single out the younger people, those under 30, that number rises to 1 in 3. 32% of our young people are religiously unaffiliated. With few exceptions, these unaffiliated folks are not looking for any kind of religion in the sense of organized religion. They're not looking for our churches. Overwhelmingly, especially the young ones, think that religious organizations are too concerned with money and power, too focused on rules, and are too involved in politics. Exemplified in a youth who spoke to me last year and said, don't you, meaning the UMC, realize that no one really cares about what you're fighting over? And that was her demographic, the younger postmoderns. So we have this rise of the nuns, showing no religious preference whatsoever. And that's filtered into the religious organizational scheme, the nuns. And originally, the P&W conference and the Greater Northwest was the original nun zone. We had the largest demographic of non-religious oriented people. But we've given up that title to New England, by the way, and so we gladly give that over. But as we all know, this is a phenomenon that we're all facing. Never lose hope, though. Phyllis Tickle has this wonderful example, which she shares, and that is that in the 50s and 60s, we had the people. They were coming to church. And Phyllis doesn't exactly say this, but she says that we lost them. They left the church. And the reason that they left, that I'm going to project, is that we did not engage them on their deepest spiritual longings and questions. And so they left to seek out those questions. And Phyllis says, what did they leave to find? The age of Aquarius. She said they left to New Age religions, to other great religious truths, Buddhism, Native American spirituality, other forms. And she said the age of Aquarius let them down. So that now we have tons of people out there who don't have a church, don't have any kind of New Age religion, and they're still hungering and seeking out that deep religious meaning. So the hope is if we can engage people on their deepest spiritual longings, we have a chance to regain their confidence. And maybe they will look to the church for this spiritual quest. Our grand narrative speaks volumes to all of us as we heard it preached today. And in the John 10:10 passage, it is that I have come to give life and have so they may have it abundantly. We know what is that deep well of faith where they will thirst no more, that in Christ we have that meaning. And if we could only share that to a greater whole that's looking for that meaning, we know, and we know the truth. So, second, confront the brutal facts. Our United Methodist Church must change and diversify. Our current UMC demographic is basically Anglo, aging, and mainstream in terms of its congregational makeup. If the average age of our UMC laity is estimated to be 58 or 59 years old, it tells us how much time we have left if we don't replace them with younger generations. I heard a great line the other day from of all people, a shuttle driver, who said he has two people in his congregation that he goes to, old people and their parents. That was a great line. I said, oh, that's our United Methodist Church. But if we look at the retention rates, everybody's suffering. Everyone is. Roman Catholic retention rates for their young people has they've lost 60% who are no longer practicing, and half remain nominally Catholic, rarely attending Mass. Evangelicals did much better through the 80s, retaining 3/4 of their children, but then they suffered this huge drop-off in 2000, falling 13% of their young people, and still dropping, by the way. We mainland Protestants suffered the greatest drop of all. For the last half century, we've lost 1/3 of our young people, left completely. And when you add to that the 20% of mainline offspring who have stopped coming to church, we Protestants have lost over half of our children. So we're bleeding for both ends of the spectrum. Our mature generations who have really formed this church and given it their resources, they're, of course, dying because of the age factor. And we don't have those future generations who are sticking around and being part of our church. But again, never lose hope. We must seek out the diversity of our mission fields all around us. Younger people, ethnic people, secular people. That's our mission field. That's who we have around us. And the average age of the U.S. population continues to grow, but it's still 35.3 years of age, a younger demographic. And if we take Hispanic population, that average age drops to 24.6. So that if we really do seek out ethnic people, the rise of our Hispanic population in this country is dramatic. We continue to increase in numbers in a good way, I believe, so that there are 54 million Latinos living in our shores, and that number continues to rise, and it will continue to rise. And we need to have ministries that outreach to them in a significant way, because now we're facing the multiple generations of Hispanic families who are fully assimilated and can come to any United Methodist Church without any language problems. Our young evangelicals are leaving their churches in droves, and what they're looking for is a more tolerant church, a more tolerant place to be. They still have a conservative theology, but it's very consistent with our Wesleyan roots. In other words, they're willing to buy Wesley hook, line, and sinker. So, in discussions with Brian McLaren, for example, he tells me that in any major city, he has 2 to 3 young evangelical pastors with their congregation who is looking to affiliate with a larger denomination. It's kind of interesting, he says, because why are they looking to affiliate? Well, they're getting older, these young evangelical pastors, and they want pension and health benefits. Isn't that interesting? Well, we got that. We got that nailed, right? Our Board of Pensions is the most healthy in the whole world. We can offer them something, but the question for us is this one, and Brian poses this: are you ready to accept them? Are your rules such that you can bring them in? Do you have the flexibility to work with them? And theologically, will you accept them? Those are big questions. Are you ready for them? And I say, of course, we've got to find a way. We've got to find new ways to infuse this life into our denomination. But that's the challenge for us, because remember, some of these young evangelicals are very conservative when it comes to some of our social issues, such as abortion. I don't know if they're going to accept our social principles around some of our big issues. But that shouldn't be the deterrent. As we're going to see, the main thing is the main thing, and that is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So our grand narrative is when the Lord appointed that 70 or 72 and sent them out by pairs, he said, take nothing with you except your faith, of course. And he gave them the power that he had in God to do marvelous things. But then he said that harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord to send out laborers into the harvest. That's what our jobs are here, to find those laborers. And I was struck by Nanette's sermon today or homily, because it really was centered around the scarcity that we're all about. And we shouldn't be worried about scarcity. I'm struck by Brene Brown's comment about scarcity, which she uses as a metaphor. And she says the opposite of scarcity is not abundance. We often go to that level and we think of God as being the cup full, overflowing. But Brene Brown says the opposite of scarcity is not abundance, but enough. Enough. And in our world of ecological justice and disaster in some ways, we've got to look at enough. We need enough laborers for the harvest, folks. I'm struck by that illustration example of a meeting of Kurt Vonnegut Jr. With Joseph Heller. And the two authors were at this posh dinner thrown by a hedge fund operator. And Heller turns to, or Vonnegut tells Heller, you know, this guy who's hosting this party makes more money in one day than all of the books you sold in Catch-22. And Heller says, well, yeah, that's probably true, but I'll have something that he'll never have. And Vonnegut says, what's that? And Heller says, enough. We have enough to get us through. And with a mind sitting around these tables, we will find a way. My last confront the brutal facts is this. Our United Methodist and other institutional mainline response seems to me to be isolating and defending ourselves. It's this hunkering down and fortifying ourselves against the decline of the church and the sweeping changes surrounding us in society. That's our institutional response. When exactly we have to do the opposite. Instead of fortifying, isolating, we've got to open ourselves up and reach out to wherever we can to get to that mission field and to open the doors of the church and extend that ministry in wherever we find ourselves. And in our current theological wars, it's somewhat hardening into a winner-take-all battle between the twin theological extremes. And I don't think that this body is representative of that ethos, but maybe their objective on the extremes is schism. But I believe that that is really dangerous and will destroy the church that we know of. I've used this estimate of 3 to 5% of our church may be on these extreme levels of progressivism and traditionalism. And I didn't have any scientific data to back that up, but recently UMCOM has come up with the stat that 90% of the United Methodist Church believes that any separation of our church will harm the denomination. And now we have the proof, folks, that the theological middle has spoken, and it does not believe that divisions are going to help us at all. In fact, it will hurt us. As I look around at my Episcopal and leadership colleagues in the areas that I serve, the Presbyterian Church is getting decimated. They have many national resources anymore, so they sort of closed all of their national offices. And it's a continual battle on the ground between theological forces in their church. And I think in our never lose hope, the greatness of the United Methodist Church has always been our big tent spectrum, our sense of holding together, even though we have these extremes. And as a bishop of the church, I think we must have unity as our main focus. We must be able to sit at the table with each other, and you see it daily in your work through having candidates who represent both sides of this picture. And you must, with fairness, give them all equal opportunities to be a part of this Methodist Church. That's an important ethos of who we are. And if we lose that through division, we will no longer be the United Methodist Church that I've come to love and know. So perhaps we need a movement to a deeper tolerance and celebration of our differences. Really, that issue of celebration needs to be there, that we celebrate these extremes of our church and appropriate them in a celebratory way. So, it's learning to be in community with each other. And as you look at candidates, we have to look at this quality. And we have the examples in the early church all over the map in terms of how they dealt with the issue of division. Our grand narrative in the 1 Corinthians passage is there for us all to see, and that Paul's great problem was the divisions that he was facing in the church that he started in many ways. And in this first chapter, he says that there in Christ be no divisions among you, that there be agreement. And Christ is not divided. For Christ did not send him to baptize even, but to proclaim the gospel. And that gospel is about unity of the church. I was very struck by Jan Love's comment on this in terms of the 1 Corinthians passage when she said, their commitment to Jesus Christ was so strong, you can't be kicked out of the community, nor could you voluntarily leave. And that's a great example of what I believe. I don't want to be kicked out, nor do I want to voluntarily leave. This is the truth of our gospel stance. And perhaps our task is to keep broadening our horizons, this perspective to become the new creature in Christ Jesus that Paul so desperately wants for the people. To become that transformed mind and spirit that's comfortable with total opposites, that perhaps that's the key to a competency that we need to look for in our candidates and in our clergy and our laity. The social psychologist from Harvard, Robert Keegan, has done extensive work in this area, and he provides the best research that I know of in this template of how we may progress in human mind and identity. And he does that in 3 phases. The first phase, of course, is the socialized mind, where we are shaped directly by our environment and is really expressed in our schools of thought, that we were raised and educated in an ethos, and for us, the American ethos, which is very, very much a distinct ethos for all the world. But you are also a product of your education. So those of you who are educated at certain theological schools have this kind of principles that you sort of orient around. But he said that's not good enough, that we must move to the self-authoring mind, which is to step back from that where you've been raised and what you've gained from your environment, and to generate this internal seat of judgment that makes its own choices. And then to develop a belief system that takes stands, that is self-directed, that sets boundaries and limits. And to find our own voice is that middle stage. But he said that's not still good enough, because the final stage for him is the self-transforming mind, where we once again step back, reflect on the limits of our own ideologies and personal authorities and identities, and see that any one system or self-organization is partial and incomplete. Be friendlier to the contradictions and opposites, and seek to hold on to multiple systems rather than projecting all on one particular way of thought. What it means is embracing the whole, appreciating the opposites that are dialectical, and looking for that greater truth. So it is the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which many people are accessing now, is, remember the two opposing minds or ideas that you can hold completely together in your own mind and still retain the ability to function. And then that part of the quote that he doesn't, sometimes people don't use, and that is, when things seemingly are hopeless, we are determined to make it otherwise. That's our task. Let me show you a film clip. This is from Gandhi, the movie Gandhi. And it is during Gandhi's life-threatening protest fast. And he has brokered a peace, the end of a violent response from the anti-Muslim group. And the title, of course, is How to Get Out of Hell. So let me share this with you. The power of film and that illustration, I don't think we have to say any more about this issue of retaining two opposites, or the whole expansion of a greater place with God. So to finish up today, this is actually a teaser to the next segment. We're going to break into groups, but to let you sort of chew on a few things, and that is, we now face a situation where we have to reset our ministry agenda, all of us. That's not only our candidates, it's all of us here. All of the paradigms and systems that we've crafted for our United Methodist Church are for a bygone era. And the culture has forced us to change, so that the whole movement from an attractional to a missional model has to be factored into this. And the attractional model, which is our heritage, focused on buildings and institutions, highlighted the program model of which we've been trained in seminary, and had the old paradigm of the therapeutic model, which was individualistic, professional, and consumeristic. And we now find ourselves clearly in a missional stage, going back to our roots, as Randy had mentioned to us the first day, beyond buildings and institutions and directly to the mission field, returning to discipling models and DNA, and a dynamic mission of outreach rather than in-house programming. But we, in this hybrid time, are one step in the attractional model and hopefully one step out. And if we're two steps, we're totally planted in the attractional model, we're in real trouble, folks, because we've got to move to the hybrid. And the hybrid is have both, and hence my emphasis on the polar opposites. Hybrids allow for the greatest avenue for innovation and experimentation. So this is the time that we figure this out in a hybrid way as we move from one transition to the next. What can we jettison? What do we need to leave behind? And what do we need to retain? The adaptive folks, Heifetz and Linsky, talk often about this in change. And what they point out is that the DNA difference between a chimpanzee and humanity is in percentage points. Heifetz says 99%, but actually in research, it's probably about between 96 and 97% of our DNA is the same as a chimpanzee. Well, 4% made all the difference in the world in an evolutionary sense. What 4% would leverage the church the greatest and make the greatest difference in changing our dynamic to something evolutionarily brilliant and complex and life-changing for the church itself? That's what we've got to figure out. That's why all of you are here. So, our expectation of the clergy must change completely. And I'm not going to even go through this because I want to get you time, but let me close with this last cartoon. This is a Gary Larson cartoon. And it's the real reasons dinosaurs became extinct is they're smoking. Now, we all know that the latest theory, of course, and the accepted one, is that a huge asteroid hit the Earth and really developed this nuclear environmental winter. And so it obscured the sun, put so much dust in the air that the large species could not survive. And they did not have vegetation. And so they died because of their huge biological frameworks that could not survive this environmental disaster. Well, you see the parallels, folks. We've got this huge bureaucratic structure called the United Methodist Church that is unwieldy at this point. And this asteroid has hit us already in the cultural changes that we're facing. And the question is, how are we going to survive it? It's not through too large to fail. It's going to be in small, incremental movements that all of you represent in your settings. And a return back to the mission fields that all of you are serving to innovate and experiment and figure out a way forward in the light of the environmental change that we have. So, we want you to break into your groups at this point. I'm going to give you a full 20 minutes. What is your present context? What does your annual conference need the most right now? What is your biggest constraint and problem? And what do you need to prioritize the most in light of the great cultural change that you face? So you don't have to go through these questions, by the way. You may forge your own. But the first step is for cabinets and boards to start talking about a collaboration, which I'll tackle next in the next segment. But please, for the next 20 minutes, just gather at your table. If you don't have a table, go find one that you can relate to and be a part of. And if you're a small conference, 2 conferences can get together, by the way, representatively here. Okay? So go at it. You got 20 minutes to get going. There we go. Okay. Now, here's a systemic constraint for us, and that is the Book of Discipline. I wanted a way to somewhat illustrate that the Board of Ordained Ministry has 4.5 pages in the Book of Discipline, single-spaced at 11 numbered font. It just goes on and on and on. And I had my communicator, who's a postmodern layperson with an MDiv. This was his humor on the Book of Discipline. So we're not going to do the whole thing, but this is his way of dealing with it. But seriously, there's just so much there, and you all know this, whom I think one of the most astute disciplinary or Book of Discipline experts we have come from the Board of Ordained Ministry. So you know the literature and how so massive it is. It's a product of our runaway legislative process that is perhaps something we need to jettison to look to the new. Yeah, I'm serious. So my hope would be in Portland we could throw out the Book of Discipline and start over, but if I were king, geez. Unfortunately, I doubt if that's going to happen. But I hearken back to Steve Jobs, though, on this one. Now, interesting enough, Jobs broke all the rules of leadership, all the rules of leadership models. He broke all of them. He had very little emotional intelligence. He was a command and control leader. He was egocentric to the max. He's an egomaniac in some ways. And those of you who've read Isaacson's biography of Job sees, it just broke every leadership rule in some ways. But he was also a genius and very charismatic. And through the force of his personality alone, he brought Apple back from the brink of the John Sculley era, where it was the epitome of the maintenance mindset in Sculley. And Jobs was the one who redirected them back into something very dynamic. So here's an example. One thing about Jobs is his simplicity, his clarity, and his focus. Those were his success tools. And what he did every year was he invited maybe 100 people to a planning retreat. And at Apple, you knew you were in if you got an invitation to this one event, which Jobs himself led. And they'd go through a week of visioning and projecting new directions and inventions. And then at the end of the retreat, Jobs would stand at his famous whiteboard and he'd write down a maximum of 10 to 12 new ideas that were really compelling by the body that came there. And then, typical Jobs, he'd take his marker and he'd cross out all the ones he didn't think were made it up to snuff. And he'd come up with 3. Maximum of 3. And then he'd tell the crowd, these are the 3 that we're going to work on this next year. Period. All the rest of them were off the table. So really, the sense of clarity and direction were where he centered in. And since his death, if you go to Apple now, you realize that they're getting outside that sort of ethos, that sort of value system in their display of what they have available now. So I'm really wondering if Apple's going to survive the post-Jobs era. Now, for us, we're centered around a central mission. And we put this up on the website. By the way, some of you wanted to know about these PowerPoint presentations. Certainly nothing new, so half of you probably don't care. But some of you wanted them. We'll try to upload them to the event site in a PDF form so that you'll have the information available. But you'll have this one. So if, what I tried to do, the Gallup folks do a really good job in trying to focus mission. And I've sort of adapted our mission from their sequence here. And so you could print this whole thing out if you wanted on the website, the event website. But basically, it must start with our personal mission and purpose. So in the bottom of this chart, I would like you to put in what is your personal mission and purpose in life. And that's, it's an exercise that you do at these workshops that you go to, but it really is helpful, and I'll explain more as we go along. But your present context in purple is where you are. And I think in the local church, the individual is below that, and then the local church is the next category. There are 2 things we're thinking are very dynamic in experimentation and direction and resetting our agenda, and that's making disciples and mission field engagement. Those 2 have to happen at the local level. But then you have this middle ground, which is both the local church and the larger whole, which is bringing people to Christ. And the ones that we highlighted were young people, ethnic people, and new people, secular people. And what the church has determined that the best way to do this is to go through creating vital congregations. Now, I know it's a little controversial because some of us don't buy in hook, line, and sinker to that particular sub-goal or objective, but it is what the denomination has determined at this point, creating vital congregations. And there is this sense of life that will emerge in our vital congregations if we do this. If we could expand this to new faith communities, whatever form they are, then I'm right with this concept. But it really does mean we have to look to sustainable growth. Sustainable growth. And that's both the local church and the denomination as a whole. All of us representing the annual conferences in many ways. These are the priorities that are set before us. So then we have the final level, which is the general church and really the ecumenical church and the global church, and that is at annual conference level, at general conference level, at jurisdictional level. We have our main mission statement, which is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. 4 focus areas as an extension of that. It's very clear we have marching orders from the top. We know what our purpose is. And I think that this mission statement has served us well and still may be relevant, but perhaps the next stage is for us to discern what is God's next mission and purpose for us. And I think it's time for us to start thinking of a new mission statement that will be as successful as this one, but will galvanize the denomination to a future. And that's going to only take place with discernment, prayer, and that deep presence of God. So that's a vision for you all. Maybe you have one. We need to start talking about that for the denomination. This has served us well, but perhaps now it's time for us to have a new general mission statement for the church. And going into 2016 General Conference, that will be the place that it will be vetted. So I think this is time for us to start looking at that. But to keep the main thing the main thing is the critical issue for us. We've got to realize that making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation is what we're about right now. And I think it is serving us so that our missional purpose is clear. We know where we're at, what we're supposed to be doing. And the creation and resourcing of vital congregation is what the conference and what all of us are here for today, even though some of us serve at the local level. Many of you are officers of the church, of your annual conference, through your roles and positions. But to bring in a Gil Rendell adage, it is to be steady in purpose, but flexible in strategy. There are our Wesleyan heritage and theology which we cannot jettison, that will always be a part of us. And this is prominent when I go into not only ecumenical, but interfaith dialogues. When I'm participating with other faiths, I like to ask the question, or start with the first question of, what is non-negotiable for you in your faith position? And it's very clear for me, in those settings, it's my allegiance to Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. I just put that straight out. I cannot give up Jesus Christ as the triune God. And they're always cool with that. The Buddhists and the Hindus and the other world religions always say, oh, that's no problem for us. The Muslims, he's one of our wise sages and prophets, so they have no problem with it. It's our Christian response to their non-negotiables that's the problem usually in our settings like this. So it tells us something about ourselves, by the way. But steady in purpose is we keep our mission statement and our direction, but the strategies all have to be on the table now. Because with the first presentation, everything has to change strategy-wise. And those old strategies are simply not working because they're a product of a system of a bygone era. What we now need is widespread experimentation and innovation. And what our task partly is to do is to craft this culture of innovation and risk-taking. And what it means is we must look for younger generation, which has this intuitively, by the way, as adapters, entrepreneurs, and risk-takers themselves. But old ways die hard. And you all know this, that some of you are facing old cultures that, for the boards of ordained ministry, this risk-taking is really a challenge for you because we have a system that avoids risk. We have a system that's risk-averse. And entrepreneurs and those that are on the edge often don't make it through our board processes, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. One, they recluse themselves because they're too impatient with our process. It's just too wieldy, and they could go get ordained in another denomination or in an independent church in an instant, and have the patience to work through it really takes a great deal of wisdom and maturity, and some of our young entrepreneurs just don't have that. But it's also us as a system. And I'll be honest with you, the ministry study really struggled with this last quadrennium when we proposed a quicker way to ordination, and the boards kicked back to us saying that's too fast, that the 2-year period is just not fast, is not enough time for us. Well, we figure out a way, because the young members, the young clergy members of the ministry study were the ones pushing for that, because they're the ones who just went through it. Okay, I understand the dilemma here, but once again, we're at the cusp of how do we reform an old way of doing things to something that's going to meet the needs of a new generation? The main thing needs to be the main thing, though. We cannot become so enamored with a provocative strategy that we forget our main purpose and mission. and that's to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Or as one of my mentors, Bishop Roy Sanos, sort of transposes that, for the transformation of the world, we make disciples of Jesus Christ, because that was the way that he came into ministry and love of Christ, through the other way, so to speak. I don't care which way you want to do this, but that is what we're all about. So, what we must discover through experimentation and innovation is new strategies that will fulfill our mission, and that's partly why you're here, is to figure out those. Now, what we don't have is annual conferences are all over the map, so we've got to find a way to be a true learning organization for the things that you're doing that are making a difference and really providing that new direction, that all of us can hear that. And then the other part of that is to hear what failed. That's just as important. What have you tried and didn't work, and why? That if we can hear that and not replicate that, we've got to come up with a denominational way where the boards can all share both their successes and failures in a synergy that's going to change the whole ship direction. All right? So here's some thoughts. The boards of ordained ministry need to work with key constituencies of the church. And these are the ones that are standard for you all. You all know these intuitively. Perhaps the one that we need to push heavily, which I will, is the bishops and cabinets working in conjunction with the boards of ordained ministry. And I'm going to talk a little bit more directly about that. But it's also the annual conference staff need to be involved in this, as well as the board of laity or your laity period. Now, I know that there are lay members of most boards now, which are some of your most vital members, but we've got to figure a way to unleash our laity into the life of leadership in our denomination, or we're toast. There's a new concept, well, it's not new, but there's a concept called collective impact in the secular world. And this is vis-a-vis isolated impact. And in order to make a difference in a secular form on the truly adaptive, wicked problems that the world is facing, public education, global warming, etc., it takes the whole community of private, public, corporate entities. Everybody needs to be at the table. The larger and more diverse the group, the better. But there are specific guidelines to what collective impact has to do to make it effective. All right, and I don't have time to show those guidelines, but they're all available through the literature. But this is the church reaching out to your network of beyond church, to the community, to the corporate settings, to the private settings, to the public settings, to all those partners to tackle these wicked problems. Now, that's the image that we've got to be for the community, but it's also the image that we've got to be as a denomination. We got a question. I know we're going to have time. Go ahead. I'm sorry? You're late. Okay, gotcha. You could, definitely. You'll lead. Good. We need our laity because they have in our churches, we have every element of this collective impact in our midst. We've got the educators, we've got the public servants, we've got the government agencies involved in our laity. Think about this. In our laity, the collective impact would be easy if we just marshal them and set them loose. So it's really something that we've got to start working in a collective way. And leadership now is all about this networking and the collectiveness of who we can reach out to partner with. The days of the solo pastor and the solo entities are gone.
I'll go ahead. Is this on?
Go ahead.
I'll try to talk very loud. When you were talking about leveraging the...
Yep.
I think I agree with all of that. But I think one entity that's left off that list that needs to be there is the local church, because that's where the path into license and ordained ministry begins for everybody.
Amen. That's a presumption on my part. As we deal with systems, the local church is our foundation and core, and I agree totally with you on that one. Now, let me give you one common systems error, and that's sub-optimizing the parts of the whole. If you strengthen any single part of the whole, such as the Board of Ordained Ministry, such as the cabinet, and you don't look at the other, strengthening the other systems, you will not have any kind of substantial change. You're sub-optimizing one particular segment, and they will be isolated and even come into some jealousy and fear. So what we have to do is look at optimizing all the systems to the best of their abilities and to create systems that are strong and vital and sustaining in and of themselves. And this is an important one for us here, is the Board of Ordained Ministry has to have the best and brightest, and the cabinets and bishops have to be the best and brightest. Our trouble with this is the bishops probably aren't the best and brightest, but and present company included. But that's not within our, that's part of our system also, and so term limits is going to come up, and I'm for that, for bishops. But the whole point of this is all of us need to be optimized. You have to bring the whole boat up. And you can't lead with one group being the strongest, because systems theory will bring that group down because of these issues of jealousy and scarcity, fears, that one group is becoming too powerful. Everyone has to be optimized, and we've got to start thinking that way. Strengthen all of the parts of the leadership system. So on this particular systems diagram, I can't go into in depth in this, but it is starting with the local church, our children and youth, our camping programs, our campus ministry and higher education, our seminaries and courses of studies, leading to the DOMs and BOMs and lay leadership. And we need lay leadership on its own right, by the way, in terms of the ministry's studies dealing with this one. How do we become lay leaders who are not CLMs but have the full authority by enriching the entire laity, not just a small segment of them to lead churches, leading to bishops and cabinets? This is a cycle that everything needs to be optimized. We need to look at the whole system, because each of these has their own separate governing body and has siloed itself from the other areas. This is the dilemma for our systems. There exists no comprehensive development plan between the systems, and there exists no generative transitional process that is a handoff system between those separate parts. We don't have a way in which we try to get the camping program to tell us who's going to go into campus ministry in the next phase of their lives, that the campus ministries, we don't have a way to connect them to the seminaries. You get the whole idea. There's no generative way that everything is working together. And that's part of optimizing the whole system, is trying to find ways in which we get away from these problems or constraints that we have here. And then our larger UMC systemic problems, just as confined to the boards of ordained ministry, is that we have a passive recruiting system. We accept those who present themselves rather than recruitment of the best and brightest in our midst. It's whoever comes our way. We take care of you. We'll process you. That's not the way that the secular world does its best and brightest hiring. We lack an understanding of what we're looking for, and that's clergy effectiveness, and we're going to get to that in the last segment, hopefully. That's what we're here for today, is to figure out some of the end product, what we're looking for. The candidacy process discourages entrepreneurs. We mentioned that already, and innovators. The system overall protects ineffective clergy. And the system attempts to please people rather than set the high standards of acceptance. And this whole thing of being nice and loving and caring is hurting us in some ways. Not that we want to lose compassion. I mean, I'm all for compassion, folks. But the secular world doesn't run on compassion. Let me give you an example, a personal one. My nephew graduated college at a major university in Denver 2 years ago, and in accounting, and immediately was recruited by one of the big three accounting firms. And my nephew's a good kid. He's bright, he's caring, but he's not a company person. His thing was, I don't know about working overtime. I don't know about accepting this assignment. He lasted 3 months. And basically they said, you're not the type of person we're looking for. Bright, intelligent, sharp, but he didn't have the work ethic that they were looking for, and they just let him go. Now, my nephew's a good kid, but he's not designed for that environment either. We've gone the opposite way in this direction. Oh, if you got some gifts, we'll nurture you and we'll love you and care for you. That's fine. But we also have to have the secular standards of what we need for the life of our church and the future. And that's all on our plates. Every one of us is involved in that. So the question is true leadership being recruited, cultivated, nurtured, trained, and exited if ineffective. That's all of our jobs. That's not just one part of it. That's not just the Board of Ordained Ministry, even though the discipline says it is. It's all part of our thing. And we've got to convince the local church of that also, by the way, that they need to send us not marginal people in ministry, that they need to work with us on ineffectiveness of the pastors. We've all got to be involved in the system for these issues. So, part of our discussion will be the boards and the cabinets really getting together today to hammer this out. But once our mission and purpose is clear, all the constituency must be aligned towards it. And the key ones for us today, which we have at the table, are the boards of ordained ministry, cabinets, and bishops. So, by the book of discipline, there is a historic firewall that we need to acknowledge. And the firewall is this. It presumes this. It doesn't actually spell this out, but it presumes this, that the bishop and cabinet are there to appoint and to supervise. And the board is there to credential, commission, and ordain. And never the twain shall meet. You don't interfere with each other in either capacity. And what I'm saying is, yes, but we're in real trouble because we've taken this to the far extreme. And what I want to say is fair process is important to keep this firewall there. I'm all for fair process, and we've got to keep the firewall in place when it comes to fair process. But everything else is up for grabs, and we need to collaborate generatively together. Part of it is our system also. Remember, Episcopalian, the bishop has a vote in ordination. So other denominations take this very differently than we do. But we have to acknowledge that the historical rootage is there in fair process for us. So the firewall continues in that the bishop and cabinet really, and this is our problem, decides how many and what types of clergy are needed, because we're on the cutting edge there, with the superintendents being out directly where the mission field is engaging. And then the board determining and selection of the gifts and graces. We're in real trouble when it comes to this issue, because the secular equivalent is this one. It's the difference between senior management, who is involved with new hiring and the number and types of hiring, and a human relations department that selects and hires and fires. If those two had a firewall between it in the secular world, we'd be the lowest economy in the world, by the way, whoever would practice this particular model. And what I'm saying is that this is the equivalent secularly of what we have right now. And we can't, we're not going to be able to leverage the best and brightest and what we need to do with our mission statement with this firewall in place. Okay? So we've really got to think through this. We've really got to find a way for our boards and our cabinets to come together in a kind of synergy that will take the church in a new direction when it comes to the issues of ordination, commissioning, selection, hiring, ineffectiveness, you name it. We've got to get this right. So, what we need to be aligned to, and that's the question. We've got to get it right. We've got to know what we're aligned to and what we're going to do in the strategy phase. We've got our mission statement, and all of us are, I believe in that totally right now. I'm committed, totally committed to making disciples for the transformation of the world. So now we're going to break into the small groups, and we're going to take a half an hour. You may do 20 minutes, 10-minute break. You could take a break now. You could do whatever you want, but you got 30 minutes to take a break and to discuss some of these questions. We'll leave these up, by the way. How strong are your individual parts? What needs concentrating and strengthening? How will you go about that? Assess your alignment with each other. Is there a common missional purpose, and are you working from that premise? And how is your communication and alignment between board and cabinet? How can you improve that direction? All right? We'll leave these up. But you got 30 minutes now in which to engage each other and take a break, by the way. We want both of those. So if you want to do, either you guys decide how you want to, it looks like you're all taking a break. I don't blame you. But come back and engage these questions.